Hello, it's David Perlman for Conversations at TheWholeNote. It's June 20th, longest day of the year. Doesn't feel like it yet, but I'm sure it will by the end of the evening.
See how this goes first.
See how this goes first. I'm with Josh Grossman, man of many hats, I think would be the title of this one. But the hat you're wearing at the moment is, at least the one that's lowest over your eyes at the moment,
right.
is Artistic Director of TD Toronto Jazz.
Right, it's Artistic Director of Toronto Downtown Jazz, that's right.
Toronto Downtown Jazz. Still, TD stands for Toronto Downtown.
Well,
right?
It gets very complicated.
Does
so it's
it?
Toronto Downtown Jazz,
Yeah.
and we're the organization responsible for presenting the TD Toronto Jazz Festival.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Toronto Downtown Jazz. So this is very much full time at this moment, or?
Absolutely. We're about to head into 10 days of full-on intensive activity. I've given my wife notice that she's not going to see much of me over the 10 days, sort of hi and bye,
Right.
and hello again.
And day one is which day?
It's Friday.
This Friday.
This Friday the 22nd.
And today is Wednesday,
Yes.
so 2 days to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 10 days full on clubs, main stages back at Nathan Phillips Square this year.
Absolutely.
After a brief competition with the geese on the grass at David Picot Square.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you-
and you know, that space, the reason we moved last year is because of the construction that was happening at Nathan Phillips Square.
Right.
And David Picot Square worked very well for us as sort of a temporary space. We're glad to be back at Nathan Phillips. We just have a little more space to work with there. It's where people are used to finding the festival. So it's all very exciting. The stage actually was going up as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, so I don't know what state it's in at this point.
Unsupervised by you?
No, I'm the artistic director. I don't have to worry about logistics, thankfully. We have a great crew of people, great staff that is really, I mean, it's so many fine details when you're pulling a big festival like this together, and they just have a handle on it. This is our 26th festival, and the executive producer, Patrick Taylor, has been there since the beginning.
Right.
The director of operations, Patty Marshall, has been there for, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say on camera, but many, many years. So they're real veterans at putting on this type of an event, and it's amazing to see them in action.
So how many stages and where? I know that Nathan Phillips Square is the main stage.
Right. So we call that the hub. So we
The
build an 1,100 seat tent on Nathan Phillips Square. We also do an outdoor stage on Nathan Phillips Square. We have activities during the day on the outdoor stage for free. And then other stages, we're doing free shows at shops at Don Mills and in the Distillery District.
Right.
And then more common names, Kerner Hall, the Music Gallery, Sony Center, Church of the Holy Trinity, and then some clubs like Horseshoe Tavern and the Rivoli, the Sound Academy, the Opera House, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few. But so it's nice because there are venues available in the city, basically of every size, which is perfect because we have acts that are going to draw all different size of crowds. So we make use of the right size of venue that we think is appropriate for the artist, and it means that we can charge varying ticket prices from low to high, depending on the artist again and the venue, and it's just a nice way to have people experience the city, especially if they're coming in from out of town.
So you're going to get to enjoy it, or you're going to be on the hook till the last day?
I've described the festival as being in the best playground in the world. I mean, it is. It's long days, and I was starting to sort of build my schedule today, thinking, they're long days. Some starting at 11 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, and going until very early the next morning. But it's just so much fun.
And what are you going to be on the hook to do during the thing?
Well, that's what makes it so fun for me as artistic director, is because I'm not worrying about too many of the logistics. My job really is to go around and meet the artists, make sure that they know who I am and that they feel welcome to the festival, and then get to hear them perform. And it is fun, but also I'm doing work there. It's amazing how many times an artist will come to the city, and once they're on stage, the performance is really different maybe than what I would have expected. Not necessarily better or worse, sometimes better, sometimes worse, but different. And so it's always interesting to be in the audience, experience that as an audience member, but also observe how the other audience members around me are reacting to it. And that sort of gets filed away for future reference. And when that artist's name comes up again next time, we sort of say, yeah, did or didn't work, or here's how people reacted to it.
Needs a bigger venue, needs a smaller venue.
Absolutely.
That kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're going to be doing some of this as well, right? During
Most likely, yeah. And some are phoners, and some is with press, with print media. Some will be on camera as well.
But you're going to be doing some interviewing. You're going to be
me personally, yes.
my chair.
Yes, absolutely.
So say more about that.
Sure.
One.
So the Ken Page Memorial Trust has been a longtime supporter of the Jazz Festival.
Great.
And in past years, they've supported something called the Ken Page Memorial Trust Workshop Series. And it's been sort of an assortment of local artists or people otherwise involved in the jazz business, in the jazz industry somehow in Toronto. This year we changed it a little bit. We're really focusing on artists that are performing on stages at the festival. So we've changed the name. It's still Ken Page Memorial Trust, generously supporting it. We've called it the Inside Track this year. And it sort of gives people an opportunity to come and hear an interview with artists, get a sense of what makes them tick, why they do the things that they do. And it's for free every day at 12:30 on the outdoor stage in Nathan Phillips Square.
Oh, on the stage.
Yeah,
Okay.
Which is, again, it's a nice venue, nice big venue, so
Right.
we can have lots of people there experiencing it. And that's, the chance to hear an artist talk about his or her craft is really special, I find. It's an insight into the artist that we don't often get. And reading a bio on a piece of paper is a bit cold. It doesn't give the true sense of who the artist is and what makes that person inspired or where the influences are drawn from, that sort of thing. So the interview setting will be really fun. So Jim Galloway, who's the former artistic director, is doing the first 5 days, and I'll do the last 4. And I've been doing my homework these past couple of days and putting together the questions, and it's, you want to be well researched. You want to sound intelligent.
People are not as impressed now as they would have been 10 years ago, where they knew that you actually had to do the research rather than go to Google for everything.
It's still research.
It's still research, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So are people typically going to be interviewed before or after they do their performances?
Oh, I think it's always before.
Always before.
Right. So, people will be performing either later that afternoon or in the evening, either on free or paid stages around the city.
And are you, as a player, talking about other hats, Toronto Jazz Orchestra?
Yes. 18
years? Did
Almost.
I read somewhere?
I think this is our 14th season.
14th season.
So we're heading into our 15th year. And
were you 9 when you started?
Thank you. No, not at all. I started it when I was a student at University of Toronto, and the trajectory of a student who's getting out of a jazz performance program is probably different for everybody. But for me, I was really keen on making performance a part of my life. And when I got to U of T, and even before, I had really developed a love of playing in a large jazz ensemble, and to work with Phil Nimmons and Paul Reed and Ron Collier
at faculty, so the 9 o'clock or
the 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock
and the 11
jazz orchestras.
Yeah, right.
That was a really special experience. I mean, to work with people that have such a wealth and depth of knowledge about the large jazz ensemble. They were all writers, so we got to play their compositions and arrangements. It was really special. And as my time at U of T was coming to an end, I realized that there weren't a lot of opportunities out there that I could see to play the type of music, and at that time it was Thad Jones, Bob Brookmeyer, Rob McConnell. I wasn't seeing a lot of opportunity to perform that kind of music once I got out of the school setting. So I said, what the heck, let's put together a band of fellow players that are interested in doing this kind of playing.
Make your own.
Exactly.
That's what we did with our magazine,
Yeah, exactly.
Not a lot of chance to write for Toronto Life. Let's just start one.
There you are, and I'm sure that you are just as wealthy as I am, working off of a big band. With 18 years, it's a special thing because everyone's realistic that they play in the band, and we've got a couple of people that have played in it since the beginning, but otherwise there's personnel turnover. And the expectations are that they're going to come in, they're going to have a good time, they're going to play with other great musicians of around the same age and similar experience. They're going to play great repertoire. And my job as artistic director is to keep things fresh because they're not going to make money at this thing. So the only thing
Right.
that's keeping them there is the experience.
And the beer.
Well, yeah, but they have to
Sometimes
pay for
the
that,
beer.
right? So even
Right.
that. So I really take that seriously as artistic director. I mean, how am I going to keep this group of 18 musicians interested? Yet again,
Yeah.
for our
So is
15th season?
TJO playing during the festival?
We are. So we're actually the last night of the festival, the last band at the Rex Hotel.
Oh, okay.
We're doing the Radiohead Jazz Project, which we did first in December, and it was a smash success. So we do 2 sets, and then there's a great local Radiohead tribute band called Idiotech, which actually is constituted of all jazz musicians who love Radiohead music. So Don Scott and Jessica Stewart and Terry Parker, I think, is on keyboards, and Ernesto Savini on drums. So these are like heavy-duty jazz players that just happen to play in the Radiohead tribute band. So we're going to do the same thing. We're bringing new repertoire. We're each bringing in new repertoire this time to change up the set list a little bit, but the format's the same. We'll do 2 sets. Idiotech will wrap it up, and it was packed. It was standing room only last time, which is a thrill for us because the band's good. We have a great time when we're playing, but we're not playing swing music. We're not playing rumbas and merengues, and we're not playing, we're not playing standards for the most part. So we're in a bit of a niche where it's not guaranteed that we're going to get a huge audience every time. So to do a show where it's a lineup out the door,
Right. That's something.
Yeah.
So when you toss these two, that hat you wear from time to time year round. Jazz festival, I assume, has its quiet times and its busy times.
Yes,
There's Dear John
absolutely.
rejection letters that you have to write for a stretch of the year.
That's right. So really, the submission deadline for the festival is December 31st. But by that point, we've already sort of figured out a lot of the major artists that we want to approach, and even some of the second and tertiary stages we have programmed to a certain extent. So, by the time mid-September and definitely beginning of October rolls around, we're almost full steam ahead already for the next year's festival.
Wow.
And certainly the biggest names require that. They need that much playing in advance. They need that kind of notice, and we need that kind of negotiation time and space.
When I look at this particular festival, I mean, it's a big festival, but it's also not a big festival compared to the giants of the jazz festival.
Right.
So I look at it and I say, well, this festival has probably twice as much real jazz in it as a smaller festival would, but it's probably got twice as much jazz in it as a larger festival would as well.
Right.
It seems like you're on a funny kind of cusp
Yeah.
with it, where it's, I don't want to sort of sound too fuddy-duddy about it, but it's really true to the roots of the music. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
So this is, I started the job in January of 2010. And I was probably fairly idealistic about how jazz festivals run going in, and in terms of how jazz music sells as a quantity, as a thing. So this is one of the big things that I've had to learn, and I'm very much still on the learning curve about how the festival kind of operates fiscally and how does the business model work. So this, I think you're really right in terms of the size of our festival. We have to program certain acts that may be outside of what most people consider jazz, purely because we know they're going to sell, and that just boosts up the bottom line, obviously. But because we're not enormous, we don't need as many of those types of shows to support the rest of the stuff. And so as a result, we can book an Esperanza Spalding, and a Trombone Shorty, and a Hiromi, and a Bad Plus, and a Tower of Power, and a Betty Levette on our main stage, which all are either jazz or are pretty closely related to the roots of jazz, and get away with it, and still sell the tickets required to support the festival. And we can go to smaller venues like the N-Wave Theater down at Harborfront, and sell out Robert Glasper, and sell out Bill Frisell, and present a great artist like Karen Allison, and have strong ticket sales for shows like that. So yeah, I think we are kind of ideally placed in some ways. The challenge still is finding the balance between the shows that are going to sell a lot of tickets and the shows that artistically are most satisfying to me as artistic director, and I recognize that's not the be-all and end-all. But to me as artistic director, it's certainly part of it. Because there is, there is a desire on my part to, create some sort of vision for the festival.
Yeah, you don't want to be bringing in over-the-hill giants and have them forget the lyrics and call it scat. It's a way of justifying why they're in your festival.
Yeah, but I mean,
I'm exaggerating just a little bit.
But that's sort of interesting too, because there are the legends of jazz that we want to make sure are represented at the festival, because without them we wouldn't be anywhere. Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't have a jazz festival with Sonny Rollins and Jack DeJohnette and people like that. But what we've seen and experienced, and some in my time, but primarily before I arrived, is that some of these bigger name artists, these legends of jazz, are very well respected and have a very strong following within that group of people that really loves their jazz and digs into it and knows the history and has been listening to jazz for years and years and years. But some of those big names won't necessarily draw in a newer audience for jazz. So again, here we're faced with a situation where we've got a fantastic name, legendary jazz musician, who rightfully so is asking a certain fee. And then we look at our past experience and say, how do we support the fee that this artist is asking when we know that that person's ticket sales have dropped off a little bit for whatever reason, and so
So it's a real balancing.
No, it really, really is. And again, this is the thing that I had to learn very quickly, because it's a lot of time and energy to even pursue an artist to the point where we are going to make an offer. So I've had to learn very quickly whether or not he was even worth starting down that path.
Right.
And it's in some ways disheartening to know that artist X, Y, or Z can't do the business anymore, especially when it's an artist that I look at and say, how can this person not sell 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 tickets? It should be a no-brainer.
But we know there are no-brainers in this one.
Exactly.
So you've got a real tightrope. Well, it's not really a tightrope, but you're on a roller coaster for 10 days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking forward to it again?
Very much so.
And afterwards, when the dust settles and you say, other than seeing my wife again, what is it that I'm going to be doing?
Actually, we're going to Montreal.
What are some of your other, are you going to go to Montreal?
Yeah, we're going to go to Montreal and experience that festival. I'm slightly embarrassed to admit that I've never actually been to the Montreal Jazz Festival, so this will be my first time going. I've gotten to know some of the people that run the festival through my work in Toronto and with Jazz Festivals Canada, which is this great umbrella group that supports the festivals across the country. And so, we're packing up. My wife, Jeanette, and our 11-month-old, she'll be by that point, baby. Right. My parents are going to come along, and it'll be a nice.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it'll be a nice family trip for 4 nights.
So, talk a little bit about some of the other work you do, because it's not all in jazz.
Correct.
I know you from the Toronto New Music Alliance going back, and you're connected with Continuum Contemporary Music.
Right.
That's the name, CCM.
Yeah, Continuum Contemporary Music. So when I worked at the Royal Conservatory of Music for 4 years, and when I decided that it was time for me to move on, I actually went on from there and had 2 part-time jobs. One was with the High Park Choirs of Toronto, and the other was with Continuum Contemporary Music. And when the Jazz Festival job came along, that's a part-time position, so I had to let something go. It was the High Park Choirs, unfortunately. Unfortunately, that's just the decision I made. Yeah. So I'm still with Continuum Contemporary Music as their administrator, and have been, I think this is my 5th year now with them. I'm just wrapping up my 5th year. And whereas the Toronto Jazz Festival is an artistic director position, this is an administrative position. It's something that I also very much enjoy. It's a different part of my brain that I get to use. Very different challenges in terms of taking an organization that plays a niche music, absolutely a niche music, and how do we promote the music? How do we ensure that we're being financially responsible as an organization? Obviously, government grants play a huge role in that, but we need to find other sources of revenue. How do we what's the appropriate mix of music? What's the best way to program a season when budgets are really tight? So it's a totally different part of my brain, and it's a great challenge. The artistic directors, Jennifer Waring and Ryan Scott, are really great to work with. Jennifer has such an incredible depth of knowledge about the music and about its history. And Ryan, who has an incredible depth of experience playing the music, now adds a different perspective, and together it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, he brings everything, including the kitchen sink,
Yeah,
right? As a percussionist.
Depending on the gig, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. It's like, throwing all these sparks into a box and creating this exciting fireworks.
Do the two kinds of music feed off each other for you, or
yeah,
not?
I mean, because jazz is sort of my first love in terms of music, it's where my formal training is. I have a much stronger understanding and love and knowledge about that music than I do of contemporary music. And when I listen to contemporary music, I actually feel as though I'm approaching it from a jazz musician. So that's kind of a neat chord over there that's being used. And, there's nice chordal progression that's happening there, and that's kind of swinging a little bit.
Right.
So it's there's a lot of contemporary classical music that is challenging for me in terms of accessing it and understanding it and really sort of being able to get inside of it. What works well for me in terms of enjoying the music, especially with a group like Continuum, is that it's performed to such a high level. So the 6 core musicians are all, Canadian Opera Company or Toronto Symphony Orchestra musicians, National Ballet musicians. So these are, the best of the best in terms of this city. And whether the piece of music they're performing is like completely out there and is a graphical score and completely based on improvisation, or whether it's based on a much more standard form and notation, it's performed so well that I'm able to go along with it. So even if I'm not necessarily, it doesn't affect me sort of in a fundamental right. If a particular piece doesn't affect me on that fundamental level, at the very least, it's being performed so well, I'm happy to just be in the room and experience it. So in terms of the challenges that face contemporary music, I do find a lot of similarities because, in the jazz community, we're constantly talking about how to market and how to get more people out and how to make sure that there's longevity to the form, the art form, and where are the appropriate venues, which is the exact same conversation to a large extent that's happening in the contemporary classical world.
Absolutely. And for us too, like keep your interviews to 3 minutes or nobody will watch them. So we haven't learned that lesson here.
Well, what can you get in 3 minutes? I mean, come on.
Exactly.
It's on YouTube. You can always skip through.
Yeah,
get to the juicy bits.
This is also true.
So it's very interesting to work in those two worlds and see those similarities. And while there's a very strong conversation about space in the contemporary classical world, there's similar conversations are happening in the jazz world. So part of me is a bit cynical and thinks that any space dedicated to one or the other may not be feasible in this day and age. Rents and leases being what they are, real estate being what it is in the city. So I'm hoping that there's some way for the two communities to actually work together.
Actual synergies in terms of resources and space, and that's an interesting one. I'm sure we'll talk about that one again.
And in my mind, in my perhaps simplistic brain, like it just makes sense. We're having these same conversations. Why are we having them separately? Why not get together and there's that sort of natural bridge where there's whatever you want to call it. There's traditional jazz, whatever various forms that takes. There's the contemporary classical music in whatever forms they take, and then there's sort of improvised music.
A kind of improv middle term.
Right. So there are classical contemporary musicians that are improvising, sort of creative music, and there's more jazz musicians that are in that world. So there's actually already that natural bridge.
The continuum with a small c.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when you look at a place like Somewhere There, look like in a group like AIM Toronto. I mean, there are mechanisms in place for musicians from both of these worlds to already get together and share. So to just sort of broaden that conversation a little bit would be very interesting.
And we'll have that one another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Good. It's my pleasure.
Enjoy the next 10. And
thank you very much.
And then the train trip or whatever you're going to Montreal.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the summer is nice and quiet. So
absolutely.
That'll be a treat.
And thank you too for being with us. We'll see you again as well. Bye-bye.